The Bears.
Because of the way they play the nickel corner here, and the nickel corner plays 88-85% of the snaps. He's got to be like part linebacker.
The Bears.
When you're in a scouting room, there's going to be differences of opinion.
The Bears.
Well, you're looking at traits. And remember when he tested very, very well.
The Bears.
Greg, why are teams wrong on quarterback evaluation so often?
Number one, it's a hard position to evaluate.
Former Bears scouting director Greg Gabriel talks football live every week on the Barroom Network. Also available on demand.
Chicago Bears select Caleb Williams, quarterback, Southern California.
What's up, Bears fans? Welcome back to the Willis Twin Towers podcast. Guys, we've been away for a few weeks now. I believe it's been 3 weeks since we've been on here. A couple weeks ago, I was on my way back from Myrtle Beach and running away from a hurricane. And then last week we were out. So it does feel like it's been a while, guys, but a ton of news today, including a new trade today. So we've got a lot in store for you guys tonight. But before we get into all that stuff, Jeff, why don't you say hello to the folks and tell us what's going on?
What's up, guys? Big news. We got, Tim and I are going to do some stuff today, a little interesting. We got cut down days coming up on Tuesday, so we're going to go over a projected 53-man. And as you guys know, there's, the end of the preseason's here. Bears went 4-0, and they look good doing it. They had a big point differential. I believe it was like 68 points. They scored more than their opponents, which is pretty substantial, in 4 games. That's 15 points a game or more. So on top of that, we've got some thoughts on what's been going on with Hard Knocks. I thought the last episode they just came out with was the best one yet. It was absolutely excellent. And obviously we got some stuff we want to talk about from training camp. So got a big loaded show today. Lots of stuff to go over. Before we get started here, just a reminder, guys, as always, please subscribe to the channel at Barroom Network here on YouTube. You can also find us wherever you get your podcasts from, whether it be Spotify or Apple or wherever it is. You can give us a follow on Twitter. It's the same thing for Aldo at Barroom Network. You can follow me at _Jeff Willis. You can follow Tim at Tim Willis24. And we pump these shows out. We try to do it every Friday. Like Tim said, we've been off a couple weeks, but with the season rolling around now, we should be here just about every week. So we're happy to see you guys. I see a couple of our regular guests in the chat. Cliff is one of them. McFact is here a lot. So we appreciate you guys being here. And as always, please feel free to throw your anything you got to say in the chat. Ask us any kind of questions. We try to get to those at the end of the show. But with our 53-man roster projection we're going to do here today, we'd appreciate any names that you guys think should or could make the roster, and we'll kind of dive into that the best we can. There's obviously going to be some interesting decisions to make here and some tough decisions for the coaching staff and for Ryan Poles to make, as there's some variables that are going to be, like I said, interesting to find out what they decide to do with that. So in any case, like I said, lots of big stuff today. The Hard Knocks episode was pretty awesome. I want to get into that a little bit later. And we will get into the 53-man roster a little bit later too. And I have plenty of talking points that I want to get to. But before we get started, Tim has a very special player that he cares a lot about. And I'm not really big into his team, so I'll kind of let him take it over. But there's a really good baseball player who retired in the last couple of days, and he's a very respected and well-known guy if you've been watching baseball for the past decade plus. And he's a fringe Hall of Famer, in my opinion. I'm not sure if he'll get in or not, but go ahead and discuss your guy, Tim, because I know you love him so much.
So, guys, I know this is a Bears podcast, and we've got a lot to talk about tonight. But I couldn't go on tonight without mentioning this guy's name. Most of you guys know that, I am a Bears fan, die hard, but I am not a Chicago baseball fan. I am a Cincinnati Reds fan. And recently, just yesterday, a Mr. Joseph Daniel Votto retired from the game of baseball. And if you guys don't know who Joey Votto is, he was the 2010 National League MVP. He is a 6-time All-Star. He has one of the highest on-base percentages in baseball history. Over, I believe it's 1,300 RBI. You guys will have to check my facts here. I know it's 350 plus home runs, 300 plus career average. Guys, he has better numbers than over 75% of the guys in the Hall of Fame. There's no doubt in my mind. Jeff says fringe Hall of Famer, but Joey Votto is going to be a Hall of Fame player. Whether he makes the first ballot or not, I'm not sure. But you can't deny what this guy put on display for his career in I believe it was 17 seasons or 19 seasons, excuse me. Just a great career. And I actually saw a statistic today. You guys are not going to believe this. Most of you would consider Ichiro Suzuki one of the best players in the history of baseball. Joey Votto, if he were to play right now and go 0 for his next 1,365 at-bats, he would still have a higher OPS than Ichiro for his career. Joey Votto has a higher on-base percentage in his career
He
than
walked a
Ichiro
ton.
has slugging percentage. That is insane to me. Now, most of you know Ichiro wasn't a big home run hitter. He wasn't a big run batted in guy. He was more of a base hit, get on base kind of type of guy. But Joey Votto's career statistics speak for themselves. I don't want to harp on this too much, guys, but I had to give, I don't even want to call it a shout out, but to give this guy some recognition for an amazing career. If you guys don't know much about Joey, he is a larger than life personality. He is the darling of Major League Baseball over the last several years. Just a great guy, great personality, awesome talent to watch on the field. I just can't say enough about him. I know I'm a Reds fan, but he did a lot for the sport of baseball. And he's just been a great ambassador for the game in general. So if you guys, if you get a chance to go look up some statistics and go look up some of Joey Votto's career highlights, it's pretty special. And last year, he was hurt for the majority of the season. He came back. His first game back, he homers in his, I believe it was his first at bat back, definitely his first game back. And then a couple of years ago, he went on a tear and hit a home run in 8 straight games, breaking the Reds franchise record and coming 1 home run short of breaking the Major League Baseball record. Yeah, I mean, he has records of his own. He's one of those things. I'm not sure exactly the statistic, but I know that it has something to do with his walk percentage is up there with the likes of like Ted Williams and some others. I believe it's OPS is what it is, or maybe not OPS, but on base percentage or quality at bats. Or I'm not really sure what exactly the statistic is. You guys will have to fact check me on that one. But he's up there with the greats. So it's hard for me to look at his career and say that he's not a Hall of Famer. There's no doubt in my mind he's going to make the Hall of Fame. And I had to take just a few moments here just to recognize Joey Votto. Jeff, is there anything you want to say about him? I know you don't follow the Reds, but I'm sure you know about Joey Votto and have some things you'd like to say.
Well, I don't want to spend too much time on this, and Aldo's got a graphic saying "Go Reds, go," and that's going to make me want to vomit. But in any case, the one thing I will say is I'm a White Sox fan, so I'm always glad to see anybody put a thorn in the Cubs side, which Joey Votto, I'm sure, did on countless occasions. The one thing I don't want to get into it too much because it's a baseball topic and it's not, it's not our Bears or any other Chicago sports team, but Joey Votto was a great player and he was one of the better players of our generation, of our era here. So, I think I understand why Tim would want to pay his respects to his team and his player there. So the one thing I'll say is, he was a phenomenal hitter. He's a great hitter and he got on base a ton. He walked a ton. And that's why his on-base percentage was so high. And the guy could hit for some power, too. So, I don't think he was as good a player as Ichiro, even though you mentioned Ichiro in comparison's sake to him as far as, he would, well, I don't remember the exact numbers you said, but he would have to go 0 for like 1,300 something to reach the same, for his OPS to be as low, quote unquote as low as Ichiro's, but Ichiro is just a fantastic player and a fantastic hitter. And again, I don't want to go too far into this, but there's been several players that said if Ichiro wanted to be a home run hitter, he could have been, but that just wasn't his game. Guy was just a tremendous player. So, and again, I know we're talking about Votto, and Votto was a great player too. So I appreciate Tim wanting to talk about his guy, and he was a good player, and yeah, respect has been earned. He was a good guy by all accounts too, and that's one of the most important things, is that he was just a good dude and a good ambassador to the game. So, anyways, let's kind of move on from that topic. Like I said, I know Tim wanted to get that in there because that's his boy, but I think we obviously got to dig into our Bears here, and there's a lot of stuff to talk about. So let's get into it without wasting too much more time. So there's a couple things I want to get into real quick before we dig into this 53-man roster take. There's some stuff that I want to go into that I've noticed between training camp and the preseason and Hard Knocks. So a couple things. First and foremost, this team is loaded with depth, and I don't think that can be overstated, because we have not seen, in my opinion, we have not seen a team in Chicago with this kind of depth certainly in the course of my lifetime. And I've almost forgot something. I'll dig more into that in a second here, but Tim brings up a good point, just reminding me of. We got to talk about this trade real quick. The Bears today acquired defensive end Darrell Taylor, I believe is his name, from
I believe it's Darrell Taylor. I'm not
sure how you pronounce it, but in any case, they acquired him from Seattle for a 6th-round pick, and this is just kind of what Poles has done the last few years. He trades a 6th-round pick this time of the year to get a depth piece, and in my opinion, this guy's a little bit more than a depth piece. He's had at the lowest 5.5 sacks over the course of the last 3 years. He's in his 4th year in the league. He was a restricted free agent before the season began because he was hurt his entire rookie season, so he had not accrued 4 full seasons of football. So he was a restricted free agent to start the season off, and Seattle re-signed him for 1 year. And they didn't pay him a ton, but this guy just a couple years ago, I believe he had 9.5 sacks. So this is a guy who, in my opinion, this is your Ngakoue replacement in essence, because they didn't bring Ngakoue back, and there was some talk that they may bring him back, which obviously now it doesn't look like that's going to be the case. And this move, in my opinion, signals a couple things. Number one, they weren't exactly comfortable, and I don't know if comfortable is the right word, but they weren't comfortable enough with the depth that they had at defensive end to stick with the guys that they had. Okay, they wanted to get somebody else in there who could give them a little bit more pass rush juice, especially in pass rush situations. There have been some Seattle fans that I've been seeing on Twitter talk about how this guy's not a very good run defender. And Cliff mentions this right here in his comment, that he's a rusher, not very good against the run. He'll play on long yardage 3rd downs. I would just counter that by saying I'm not sure, because I haven't seen a ton of film on this guy. But there have been some people who said, outside of which, that he's not as bad of a run defender as you would expect. Seattle fans didn't care for him in that regard, but we'll just have to wait and see. I don't anticipate he's going to be a guy that's in on those rush downs anyways a lot, because DeMarcus Walker is so good at stopping the run, and the Bears are just going to be good in that area in general, because they just have been. They were last year. They were one of the top run defenses in the league, and nothing has really changed about them for that to be any different. They've got the same guys who were stopping the run last year. So I think that this guy is brought in for pass rush juice, and I think he's going to provide some of that. I think he's going to give them a little bit more push. I do still have some questions about the defensive tackle depth. That's a little concerning to me, because in my opinion, you really only have 3 guys that you can rotate in there outside of DeMarcus Walker, who I anticipate would only go inside most often on rush downs. So I would not be surprised to see them scour the market some more over the course of cut downs to see if they bring in another defensive tackle. That would be interesting to see for me. And I do want to get into some more of this depth thing as far as the defensive line once we get into the 53-man roster talk. But this signaled to me that, yeah, they're looking for someone who can give them some more. Obviously, there was some talk about Matthew Judon. If anybody saw Hard Knocks, they saw that Poles was openly trying to acquire him on the show. They were showing it. Now he was looking to, on the show, they mentioned that he offered a 3rd-round pick, and that there was some stipulation in the contract that, or in the trade talks, I should say, that if Judon was not willing to re-sign a contract with the Bears, that it would be basically null and void. And obviously they didn't agree to the trade. He ended up going to Atlanta. So that was interesting to me. So, because obviously they still were looking into adding somebody, because they just added Taylor from Seattle. So I think he's going to provide some juice. Again, he's had at least five and a half sacks each of the last 3 years. So he's going to give them something, providing he stays healthy. And that's a big thing, because they're going to need it. They don't want to have to blitz all the time. So what do you think, Tim? I think it's a good move. I think it's a cost-effective move, a 6th round pick. You're talking about a guy who maybe not makes the team. In most cases, doesn't stick around for too often. So to relinquish a 6th to get a guy who's going to get you 5.5 sacks or more a year, I think is a pretty big deal.
Well, I think this is more of just getting that depth that we've been talking about. And I look at it like this. Taylor has 21.5 sacks in 3 seasons, basically. That's 7+ sacks a season, which is good. Those are good numbers. And we know that Montez Sweat's on one side, and we believe right now that it's going to be basically DeMarcus Walker on the opposite side, and Austin Booker rotating in there as well. But I don't know if they felt really comfortable with basically 2 guys rotating, and we know that they like to rotate those guys around a lot. And I think what it comes down to is there were several times last year where Montez Sweat wasn't on the field at all. There was other times where it was some of your just basically reserve players that were all out there, and your starters were all on getting a breath on the sideline. And, with this move, it's no longer, you got Dom Rob out there with, who knows. Now it's, if Montez is out, you got Austin Booker on one side, you've got Darrell Taylor on one side, or you've got DeMarcus Walker on one side. It's, it gives you a little bit more, you feel a lot better about the situation than you did last year as far as depth guys go and guys rotating in there. Now, what I think it most likely means is what you just mentioned. They like DeMarcus Walker on the inside on those rush downs. And like I was just talking about, they like to have that rotation. And right now, there wasn't a whole lot of rotation going on at that defensive tackle spot, because if you guys watch Greg Gabriel's show, Gabriel Talks Football here with Aldo on the Barroom Network, you'll hear Greg's been talking about how Billings and Dexter and Pickens have all been rotating the defensive tackle spots. It's not been 1 tech and 3 tech. It's left or right. And to me, that signifies that they don't have a lot of depth at the tackle position. So they're just trying to rotate those guys around and keep them fresh. So, and they feel pretty comfortable with them playing those different positions. I personally have always felt like Zach Pickens was a better 3 technique than he was a 1 technique. And last year, I honestly felt like Dexter would have been a better 1 tech than a 3 tech, because he was such a big frame. But we're starting to see a little more of that get off at the line, and Dexter's starting to look pretty good. But we'll see what happens when the regular season starts. We'll see if all the work that he's put in this offseason and what we've seen thus far in the preseason, if that sticks and goes into the regular season. But again, I just think this is more for depth than I'm not even sure that they believe that he's the starter opposite Montez. I think I'm going to say he probably is. It's either him or Walker, in my opinion, that's going to start.
I think it's Walker. I think Taylor is more of a specialist, and he's going to rotate, especially on those rush downs.
And that's a good point. You're right, because on first and second down, they're not going to have this guy starting in the game. It's going to be DeMarcus Walker on the outside because he's so good at playing the run. But again, I think it's a big depth piece, and as much as they like to rotate those guys in and out, it just makes sense. Although hopefully there's not going to be a whole lot of rotating, during defensive series, because they're going to have a lot of 3 and outs, hopefully, and they're not going to spend a lot of time on the field. That's the hope, at least. So,
well, let me just say one thing real quick. First of all, Aldo had a really good graphic on his screen just now of some cut-ups of Taylor's pass rushes in Seattle. So if you guys saw that, that was some excellent stuff there, and I appreciate that, Aldo. But to me, this is a big deal, because one reason that I really like this is because I think it takes some off of Booker's plate. It allows him to not have to be relied on so much as a rookie, and possibly, lower his confidence level if he goes in and starts to have some issues with success for a while, because this is a different game once you get into the regular season than what he's been seeing in the preseason. So he's going to go up against some really good offensive tackles. And I don't want it to destroy his confidence if he's losing to some of these guys, which he will lose to some of these guys. So I think this is a big deal for him to not have to be relied on so much. But I think it's going to allow him to get in there in good situations and rotate with Taylor to have some success on the outside. Now, again, I'll get into more of the 53-man conversation later because of what this means for some of the other depth pieces on the defensive line. But this is a good move for the Bears. So I like it. I think it's going to help them, especially on those rush downs, to not have to send so much pressure or so many blitz packages, even though they've looked damn good doing that. But I think this is good for a lot of reasons. And Booker is part of that, like I just mentioned. I think it's going to take a little bit off his plate and not have to rely on him so much as a rookie. So that's what I thought about that move. And again, to go into this depth stuff, this team is very deep. There's depth all over the place. I mean, really, there's going to be some interesting decisions on this 53-man roster in several different key positions, like corner, like wide receiver, like running back, like defensive end now. So I'm really interested to see what's going to happen with all this. And going back to Booker, by the way, I wanted to get into him a little bit here. So Austin Booker, guys, I mean, this dude, if anybody's been paying attention to him since the Bears drafted him, it's been nothing but good talk about him. And just watching him play, the guy is going to be a dog. I mean, he really is. I mean, I swear, last night, watching him play last night, I mean, now, granted, he wasn't going up against any starters, but it's like he's just in the backfield every single play. Every time he's on a field, he's beating guys one-on-one almost every single rep. The guy is
last night on CHGO, Adam Hogue, and the post-game the post-game podcast they had last night on CHGO, Hogue was mentioning that Booker early in the game didn't lose a single rep. He won every rep against the guy he was on for the whole. I don't know how long that lasted, but he made it a point to notice that he didn't lose. He didn't lose any reps, which is impressive considering he's a rookie going up against these guys. But sorry to cut you off, Jeff. I just wanted to mention that was a big deal.
No, and I think it's interesting the way Flus has talked about him in the past too, by using like the word slippery. You see that on tape. You see it when you watch him play. He is a slippery guy. He finds a way to get around tackles. He finds a way to slip between guys. He finds a way to just he uses power, he uses speed, and he uses a nice little spin move. It's really cool to see the way he uses his arsenal, because it looks pretty advanced for a rookie to me. He looks like a guy who's been doing it for a while. And again, it's going to be interesting to see how he goes against some of these better players, against some starters as the regular season gets going here. And again, like I said before, I'm glad that they brought Taylor in to take a little bit off of Booker's plate, not relying on him so much, because this is going to be a good thing for him. Just let him stay fresh, get in every once in a while, and have some success. And I really can't wait to see what he does. One thing I wanted to mention about him before we move on is that before the draft, I can't remember who he was doing this interview with, but there was somebody there. He was doing an interview on like NFL Network or something. And the guys were asking him, if you had a choice scheme wise of what defense you were going into and you could play outside linebacker or defensive end, which one would you choose? And he didn't want to answer it at first. It was basically something along the lines of, I'll go whoever wants me, I'm happy to go play for him, kind of thing. But they kind of pressed him a little bit on it. And eventually he relented and said outside linebacker, which was, I mean, it's a little surprising to me he said that, because, I mean, it's not too surprising because that's what he did for the most part at Kansas. But this defense is perfect for him, in my opinion. Just his size and his length and the way that they're using him and the way he plays with his hand in the dirt is impressive. So I think this is great for him. And I think this guy is going to be, like I said, he's going to be a dog. He's going to be a stud for years to come. And I can't wait to see his development. Is there anything you want to add to him, Tim, before I move on to some other topics here?
He's just, I don't really want to say much other than he's just impressive. He's got a slew of pass rush moves, and it's not like he's got one or two and he's trying to develop some others. He has a handful of them already. And I just think I think he's going to be the diamond in the rough of the draft. I think he's going to be this fifth. I think they saw that in him, that he could be that guy, because he doesn't have a lot of experience, but he just stands out on tape. Even when he was at Kansas, he just stood out. Like you could see that this kid had skill. He's got a lot of talent. rushing the passer. And I don't care if he ever has to play a single rundown. If he gets to the quarterback, I don't care. That's what I want to see happen. And I think this kid is going to have a good season. And we talked earlier, and after the draft, what our projection was for his sacks for the season. I think he's going to get more than 6. I really do. I think he's going to get 6 minimum. If I had to take the over, I'm taking it for sure. So I really like the kid. But yeah, I mean, this defensive line, it looks better and better all the time. And, I'm starting to have that confidence that, Poles didn't really need to make a big splash because they're really starting to gel and play well together. And this addition of Austin Booker I think it's going to be a good one. I really do.
So real quick, there's a comment in here from CLH asking about 53-man roster predictions. And CLH, we are going to get to that. We're going to make a prediction on a 53-man roster. And Tim's probably going to disagree with me on some of mine, and I'm probably going to disagree with him on some of his. But if you guys want, go ahead and throw in any guys you think are going to make the team or any guys you think are going to be casualties to this 53-man roster, and we'll kind of try to dig into them as best we can. There's some obvious players that we know are going to make the team, but anybody who you think is kind of on the fringe that you think is either going to make it or not make it, feel free to throw it in the chat, and we'll try to discuss it at the end. But we are planning on getting to that before we get out of here. So a couple more things I want to talk about, and I'll try to rush through this stuff so we can get to the 53. We can't talk about training camp in the preseason and Hard Knocks without talking about Caleb Williams a little bit. Okay.
Jeff, before you get into it, I want to say something really quick about this.
Go ahead.
I admit I was wrong. I admit it 100% wholeheartedly. I stood by Justin Fields and I said that the Bears should stick with Justin and we should trade the pick and get a slew. I was wrong. He's the guy. Caleb is, I wholeheartedly believe this kid is going to be the guy. He's going to take the Bears to the promised land. We are winning. I'm saying it right now. We are winning multiple Super Bowls with Caleb Williams. We've been putting on here about Jeff and his quote here since whenever that was. Although just put it on the screen when Jeff said that several months back. I'm saying it right now. The Bears will win multiple Super Bowls with Caleb Williams. Not one, multiple. This kid has got that trait. I feel confident in this. And what Ryan Poles has done with this roster, guys, it's got to be done on the field, and we haven't seen it yet. But what I've seen, I know it's the preseason. This team is deep. These guys are big. They are fast. They are athletic, and they can play football. And they're tough as nails. They love playing together, and they all love football, which we don't know that it's always been that way. But I'm telling you, this team will win multiple Super Bowls, and I'm calling it right now. I'm going to make the prediction now. The Bears will make the playoffs in 2024, 2025.
Well, I will say this. I'm not gonna start making predictions about what the Bears are going to do as far as Super Bowls. I mean, that's the hope. I mean, I really do hope they do. But yeah, I'm with you. I mean, look, I was on board with the same thing. I wanted to keep Justin. This is back, several months ago now. I wanted to keep Justin. I thought it would be a good idea to move down and accrue a lot more draft picks and do something with that. But this team is not far enough away as it is. And I mean, they got enough. They've got enough there right now to win. And look, it's pretty obvious at this point that they made the right decision, at least to me, because the biggest qualm that I had before the draft with Caleb had nothing to do with his talent. And I talked about that at length before the draft. His arm talent was so obvious on film that part always made sense. It always made sense why they would go that direction. The one question that I had was because of the reports that were coming out of LA, specifically from the media out there, and some of the other things that we'd heard from some people in the know, like Josh Lucas, for instance, was on, I can't remember if it was on Hogan Johns or on NBA. I think it was on Hogan Johns. Yeah. He was talking about, there were some things that he'd heard about Caleb that would scare the shit out of him. That was his exact quote. So hearing those kinds of things And some of the stuff that was said by the local media in LA was kind of concerning because it didn't seem like he was the kind of guy that, with the maturity, with what it took as far as being a football guy, as far as being the right kind of guy for the job. There were some things that were said that were concerning. That being said, I was obviously wrong about that, as Tim just said. Everything we have seen thus far since he got into the building has been incredibly impressive. The way he leads his team, the way he goes about his business, the way he works, the way he talks, the way he interacts with his teammates. They've all talked about how much they love him and how all that was basically bullshit, how easy he is to work with. And like I said, the talent is obviously undeniable. I mean, the shit that we see this guy doing is crazy. The arm talent is crazy. And in games, you see it in the games, and it's like, man, he's running to the left and still making these throws. He's running to the right and still making these throws. And it's very impressive.
On a dime.
But what was most impressive to me is when I'm watching Hard Knocks and seeing some of these throws he's making on Hard Knocks, it's just a little bit more of a high definition look, and it's like right on top of him. You're seeing this kid has an absolute effing cannon, dude, a cannon. And it's like Tim said, he's put. It was early on in the episode where, again, he's rolling to his left and he just shoots. I mean, the ball literally looks like it's shooting out of a cannon I think it was, I want to say DJ Moore on the sideline. He made this throw to. I can't remember for sure, but it was just, oh my God, dude. It was one of the most impressive throws you'll ever see. I mean, the kid.
It's effortless. He does it effortlessly. It's so fast. It's a flick of the wrist.
This flick of the wrist, and
dare I say, it is Aaron Rodgers-esque the way that ball just comes out of his hands like it does. It really is.
And I mentioned this on Twitter the other day too. After watching him, it was like a week ago actually. After that game that they played against, not Buffalo. Who was after that? Cincinnati. In the Cincinnati game, the kid just has this innate awareness that is absolutely absurd for a rookie. The way he moves around in the pocket, the way he avoids pressure, the way he can just sense what's coming and where it's coming from. His feel is so advanced for a kid who's only a rookie. And he showed a lot of that in college.
Well, to be fair, he was running for his life all of last year. So he did get a pretty good feel for it.
I mean, and I think they've protected him pretty well, all things considered, here in Chicago so far. Again, we're not at the regular season yet. This has only been preseason stuff we're talking about. But the talent, again, this stuff is undeniable. This is the kind of stuff that translates what you're seeing right now. Now, maybe, again, he hasn't gone against starters the entire time in the preseason so far. But the things he is doing is just, it's football. You can tell good football when you see it. And to me, that's something that's going to translate. The way he does things. Now, there's going to be people who say he needs to work a little bit more in structure, but he's shown an ability to do that too. He, especially the first 3 drives against against Cincinnati, where they went 3 and out 3 times in a row. He was getting the ball off quickly. I mean, he's seeing it and going, seeing it going. And maybe it wasn't the most successful plays in the world, but it was exactly what the detractors were kind of going on about this guy, whether or not he could play in structure or not. And he's shown an ability to do it. And that's all I think the more he does it, the more comfortable he's going to get with it. But one thing I really like about Shane Waldron so far is he's shown that he is willing to roll him out a lot and to use his skill set as an advantage. He's going to run a ton of nakeds and bootlegs. He's just going to do that a lot because he's good at it. And the Bears are going to, they're going to be successful with that. So personally, I think, again, I'm not going to go on a limb like Tim just did and say the Bears are going to win multiple Super Bowls. I certainly hope so. But, look, from what I am seeing from this kid, since he's gotten in the building, like I said, number one, like Tim just said, we were obviously wrong beforehand. But what we're seeing from this guy shows me that he is going to give us the best chance to do what Tim says we're going to do, which is win multiple Super Bowls. I think he's got some kind of aura about him. It just reminds me of some of the greats. The way he's able to go about things, the way he interacts with his teammates. And I think that's a big deal too, how close this team is. They all are extremely close. They all love each other. They all look like so this is not the same thing, obviously, but I just want to make a little quick comparison here. When I was in high school, my wrestling team, the school I went to for the first 3 years, we were one of the better wrestling programs in the entire state. My freshman year, we got third. My sophomore year, wait a minute, I gotta remember. I think we got third my freshman and sophomore year, and then we were state runners up when I was a junior. And then the year I left, my senior year, they won state. But my point in all this is being on that team, I kind of got a firsthand look of the importance of the camaraderie within the group and how important it was for everybody to care about each other and what that brought to the team. We were obviously a very successful and very good team as it was by our individuals, but the fact that we were all it mattered to us all so much to practice hard, to compete our best, to give it everything we had, and just give that little bit of extra every time we were on the mat because we didn't want to disappoint the guys around us. And I think that's very important to keep in mind here with the Bears, is because they're not going to want to disappoint their teammates. They're going to want to be the best they can be all the time. And not only just that, but this is obviously an incredibly skilled and talented group of people they've got here who I think, again, as Tim mentioned earlier, they're so big and fast and athletic. You see it when they're walking around on the field. These guys are just, they're huge and they're lean and it's just, they're explosive. So again, the development is going to be a big part of this, but what we're seeing so far from this team, the camaraderie and everything, I think it might be what sets this team over the top. It might be what takes them over the top and makes them a truly great team. This defense is going to be very, very good. We already know that. But if the way they work together, the way they are with each other, it shows me that, again, it might be what takes them over the top to being at that elite level. I don't know if it's going to happen right away this year, but in time, I think we're going to be talking about the Bears as one of the better teams in the league for a long time. I really do believe that. And Caleb Williams is a big part of that. This defense is a big part of that. The camaraderie is a big part of that. So I think that's important to notice or to talk about here. So again, Caleb, like I said, we cannot talk about preseason, training camp, Hard Knocks without talking about Caleb, because this kid has been incredibly impressive basically ever since he walked in the door. And just the things you're seeing from him, it really leads you to believe that he's going to be the truth. It really does, at least to me. So moving on from that, really quickly before we get into the other stuff, there was B. Shep made a comment here and it just pointed out that I wasn't wrong about my take on Justin Fields or your take on Justin Fields, saying that he would have had success too. Guys, I don't want to sit here and say that Justin Fields wouldn't have had success with the Shane Waldron offense and all the pieces that we have. I don't disagree with that. But if you could take the two quarterbacks and pick and choose one of them, Caleb has the talent. And it's not even just the talent part of it, because Justin's incredibly talented too, but the arm talent of Caleb Williams is better than the arm talent of Justin Fields. The cerebral ability of Caleb Williams is better than that of Justin Fields. I was just going to say, that the physical talent is obviously undeniable. We all know that the arm talent is superior. But it's the way he's picked things up. You didn't necessarily expect him to pick it up so fast. And he has. I mean, the way he processes is obvious. You see it. He's different. He's just different. And, like I said, when you watch his college tape, the talent was undeniable. It was the other stuff that I kind of had some questions about. And again, everything he's shown since he walked in the door squashed all of that. I mean, he is like night and day from what we thought he was going to be, or what we thought we were hearing about him. So I'm very hopeful for him. I really do think he's the truth. I think he's going to be the dude. And he's the kind of guy that, he can be one of the best quarterbacks in the entire league. And I don't think it's going to take him very long to do it from what we're seeing. He's got a moxie about him. And it's not even just having the moxie, but he's got the talent to go with it. And when you have both of those things, that's typically where success really starts to come out. Because if you're confident, and it's not just confidence and swagger are two different things. And I feel like if you have confidence with swagger, with ability, that's when you see things like Patrick Mahomes, like Aaron Rodgers. Those types of things happen when you have all of those things put together. And so far, we have seen that from this kid. He's never appeared overwhelmed. And that's the one thing we
No.
can say about Justin is there were times where he looked overwhelmed.
Yes.
And I have not seen that from, and the way Caleb, not only is he not overwhelmed, but his demeanor is always so calm. He just moves right on to the next play. There's no adversity there. It's just, he makes a bad play and he's quickly trying to figure out what he did wrong. And he just moves on to the next play. And usually he makes a play after that. I don't know. A lot of you guys will remember when Justin was on the sidelines a couple years ago doing the breathing techniques, trying to calm himself down. We've never seen any of that from Caleb. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but it's like the guy just, things don't phase him like that. And I think that's a huge deal because the way we're going to need him to perform late in games, 2-minute situation, drive to win the game kind of thing, like Peyton Manning was so good at, like Tom Brady was so good at. You give these guys time at the end, they're going to win the game for you. So I think that's important to recognize because this is a big part of his evaluation too. And a big part of the reason why they brought him in is because they see him being successful in those areas. So let's move on from that because obviously we could talk about Caleb for days, just the way he's done things. But I felt like it was important to get that off my chest at least and discuss how I felt about him. And I'm glad you mentioned the way you felt about him too, Tim. So I don't want to spend too much time on any of this other stuff. There's a lot of stuff we could get into here, and maybe we'll save it for next week. But we need to get into the 53-man roster before we run out of time here. So I'll just mention a couple things off the bat real quick. And I'll tell you the guys that I fully anticipate to make this team. And Aldo's going to have a graphic of Tim's 53-man as well. But there's certain guys that I think are 100% locks to make the team. And I'm going to name these guys off real quick. And then we'll kind of get into some of the fringe guys. What are you going to say, Tim?
I was just going to say, before we get into that, mine was made, admittedly, last night before the game. And it was also obviously then made before the trade. So there are some things that I would say are going to be different. And when we get to that, I'll explain that. But it's obviously going to be a little bit different than what it would have been had I made it today. Go ahead, Jeff.
So I'll give you guys, I think it's 44 guys that I think are for sure locks to make the team. And then there's 9 spots that I think are kind of up in the air, and we'll get to those at the end. But I'll name you guys the guys I think are going to make it just from my list here, and then we'll show you Tim's list also. So these are the obvious ones to me. Caleb Williams, Tyson Bagent, 2 quarterbacks that will make the 53. We'll get into the practice squad and how we think that's going to play out in a little bit too. But those are the 2 quarterbacks that are on the 53-man. For running backs, DeAndre Swift, Khalil Herbert, Roshan Johnson, I think are all locks to make the roster. There's going to be some other guys up in the air there as well that I'll talk about in a minute here. Wide receiver, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Roma Dunze, Tyler Scott, Velus Jones. I think all 5 of those guys are locks to make the team. I don't think there's anything that any of them have done, even Velus Jones. I don't think there's anything he's done to lead you to believe he's not going to make the team. And he was impressive as a running back last night. So I think he makes a team as a receiver, but they're going to use him in a lot of different ways. Tight ends, the 3 for sure they're for sure going to make it: Cole Kmet, Gerald Everett, Mercedes Lewis. I don't think there's any questions about those 3. Offensive line, these guys I think are locks to make it: Braxton Jones, Tevin Jenkins, Coleman Shelton, Nate Davis, Darnell Wright, Ryan Bates, Karan Amagaji, Matt Pryor. I think those guys are all locks to make the team. Again, we'll go on to some of these other guys in a second here. Defensive line, Montez Sweat, Jervon Dexter, Andrew Billings, Darrell Taylor, the guy who was just traded for from the Seattle Seahawks, DeMarcus Walker, Zach Pickens, Austin Booker, all locks. Corner, Jalen Johnson, Tyreek Stevenson, Kyler Gordon, Terrell Smith, Josh Blackwell, Jalen Jones, all locks. All 6 of those guys were on the 53-man last year. And 5 of those 6 guys outside Terrell Smith were on the team for the last 3 years. Terrell Smith was just drafted last year. So otherwise he would have been on probably in the first place as well. But these guys have all shown the importance to how important they are to the team, especially Blackwell and Jones on special teams. So those guys I think are all a lock. Linebacker, Tremaine Edmonds, TJ Edwards, Jack Sanborn, all locks to make the roster. Safety, Kevin Byard, Jaquan Brisker, Jonathan Owens, and I think Elijah Hicks is a lock to make the roster as well. Mm-hmm. And then your 3 specialists are obviously Cairo Santos, Torrey Taylor, and Pat Scales. So again, that leaves 9 spots that are open to interpretation, what we think is going to happen. And let me hit on one right off the bat before we show your 53-man, Tim, that I think, a guy who I think is going to make the team, but there's been a lot of speculation whether he would or not, is Kari Blasingame. I think he does make the team. And there's a lot of people who have said, well, Shane Waldron doesn't like to use fullbacks, so I don't think he's going to make the team. Well, a couple things to that. Number one, they've been using him, if you guys haven't noticed. They've been using him in a variety of different ways, okay? And he didn't play in the last preseason game either, which tells me he's a lock. So there's a thing I want to mention real quick that Greg Gabriel talked about in his podcast the other day, was that just because Shane Waldron hasn't used a fullback, has he not used a fullback because he didn't have one? I think that's an important note to keep there. Maybe the reason he didn't use one is because they didn't have one on the roster. You know, he doesn't control whether or not the personnel staff decides that they want a fullback on the roster. I'm sure he had some say in it, but he had used tight ends in those roles in the past. Now they've got Blasingame, who's one of the better fullbacks in the league, and he does a good job at it. And they have been using him both in training camp and in the preseason, you know, in a variety of different ways. So I think he's going to make the team. Is there anything you want to say about that, Tim, before we kind of get into your projected outcome here? Because I think that was an important to note there, that I do think he's going to make the roster based on the fact that they especially based on the fact that they have been using him.
So I admittedly last night had him as a cut candidate. He was cut. He was not on my 53-man roster, but after watching I admittedly didn't get to watch the whole game last night because it was blacked out in my area for whatever reason. So I didn't get to watch the game. I just watched bits and pieces on my phone with what my phone would actually let me stream of it. But admittedly, like I said, Kari Blasingame was not on my 53, but I actually changed my mind because I think I have Travis Homer making the final 53, and I think Travis Homer's getting cut. And I think Kari Blasingame will stick around. And I do think you made good points as well, and Greg has talked about this too. Just because he hasn't used a fullback doesn't mean he won't. I will say I don't necessarily agree with you that they've used him. I don't think they've used him very much. Not as much as he's been used in the past, at least.
It's the preseason.
Again, it is the preseason, number one. And number two, he's a fullback, and he's there for a reason. And it's not necessarily how much he's getting used. It's because when they want him to be out there, he can be out there, and he's going to provide he's going to be better in that fullback role than putting a tight end there. So that's my big thing. Is at first I did not think he was going to make the 53, but I changed my mind after last night's game. Travis Homer did not look very good. He doesn't offer you very much in the running back room, and we know, and we don't expect him to be there. Like, that's not what he's there for. He's there to play teams, but you have a lot of guys who can play teams now. And they paid him a lot of money to come here to basically just be a special teamer. I think there's other guys who can fill that role just fine. He's not a necessary piece, and that gives a roster spot to a younger player as well.
I'll get to Homer in just a second because I want to make a couple points about him. But Aldo mentions in the chat here that Blasingame was being showcased for other teams and that Roshan is 220 pounds and can be a fullback. I would counter it this way. I'm not sure why you would showcase Kari Blasingame to any other teams in the preseason, because I don't think anybody's going to trade for him. If any team wants him, they're just going to let him hit waivers after you cut him and then pick him up then. So I just don't see a scenario why they would showcase him for other teams unless they expected to get something out of him, to make a trade for him. And I don't see that being the case. So I really think that they want to see what they've got with him. And I do think they're going to use him. I think they're going to keep him. And another thing I wanted to mention to you guys, some of the insiders around the team that have been talking about this and doing their 53-man rosters. I believe Hogue had him on his 53-man. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I was watching the Chicago Bears podcast on ESPN today with Courtney Cronin, and she mentioned on her 53-man that she had Blasingame on there, and there were things that she's heard from people that leads her to believe that he's going to make the team. And when you hear a beat reporter, somebody who's in the know, say something like that, it kind of like gets you thinking, well, they must know something. So in my opinion, I do think he's going to make the roster. Now, in regards to Travis Homer, if you'd asked me 2 weeks ago, I'd have said he's a lock to make it because of his special teams value. But the way they've been using him in the preseason, spending a lot of time on seeing what he can do offensively, which has been a dud to say the least. He's dropped multiple passes
all the time too.
Very well. And he just, to me, it looks like there's a cap savings of I think it's 1.9 million if you cut him. I think that he does not provide enough offensively, obviously. And I don't think even with his value as a special teamer, I don't see him as a guy who's not expendable anymore because they've got other guys who can play teams. And I think it's going to open up roster spots for especially some defensive players in the defensive backfield that can benefit from this, can benefit from making the roster without him being there.
To me, so if it gave you the option to keep Ian Wheeler or cut Ian Wheeler, if you have Travis Homer or not, I'm cutting Travis Homer to keep Ian Wheeler.
Well, Wheeler's an interesting one because I think he's put some good stuff on tape and he's obviously very, very fast. But there's a part of me that thinks that he's going to get cut and get signed to the practice squad. I don't think there's going to be a ton of teams lining up to sign him after he gets cut. I mean, maybe that's going to be an interesting one to see because he has shown some good stuff, but I think he's going to be one of those guys that ends up on the practice squad.
Well, let's go ahead and get to the 53 and we'll discuss it as we go because we're getting a little bit short on time here. So let's go ahead and get into it really quickly. Obviously, quarterbacks, Caleb Williams, Tyson Bagent, and I have Brett. Anything that's highlighted on here, guys, is practice squad, in my opinion. So Brett Rippon to the practice squad. That's quarterback. Running backs. This is where it gets a little tricky because, like I said, I changed my mind a little bit. But locks to me are DeAndre Swift, Khalil Herbert, Roshan Johnson. I'm going to take Travis Homer's name off there. I think he's getting cut, and I do still believe Ian Wheeler is a practice squad guy. I think they're going to roll with 3 running backs and Ian Wheeler to practice squad.
One quick comment about your quarterbacks before we go on to the next list here. I'm going to be interested to see what they do with their practice squad between Brett Rippon and Austin Reed.
They could very well have both of them on the practice squad.
I was going to say I would not be surprised to see them keep 2 quarterbacks on the practice squad. It would definitely be an outside the box move, but Rippon is the vet and Reed is the guy you want to see what you have in, I think. So you want to keep him around for that reason. But the one thing to keep in mind is the third emergency quarterback that can be on the roster on game day has to come from the practice squad. Right. So I think both those one or both of those guys is going to be on the practice squad. I'm just going to be interested to see if it's both of them. But let's go ahead.
It very well could be. But wide receivers, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Roma Dunze, Tyler Scott, Velus Jones I have on here. And I think DeAndre Carter is still going to make the roster. They just don't really have anybody at punt returner. And I know he hasn't looked that great, but they paid him a lot of money. He can actually play wide receiver better than some of those other guys can. I just think he's going to make the final 53. Colin Johnson and Nasimba Webster are your practice squad receivers. Go ahead.
DeAndre Carter has reportedly looked good in camp, and he obviously had that bad play last night where he didn't go for the fair catch, and he got pushed up into the ball, and they ended up taking the Chiefs took over like inside their own 5-yard line or inside their own 10-yard line. So that was a bad play by him. But I agree with you. There's not a lot of options as far as a punt returner right now. I think he is going to make the roster because I think he is that guy. But I also would not be surprised to see them move on from him and use Josh Blackwell as their punt returner.
And they very well could. But I think you want to have 6 wide receivers. And I'm not really sure that Velus Jones is one of your wide receivers. Not as one of your 6 necessarily. Like it's a guy who, like we talked about earlier, he's going to be that gadget guy. He's not necessarily I need you to come in here and be the wide receiver at this spot or whatever. So to me, he would be like your number 6-ish, and Carter would be your 5. And you need to have 5 wide receivers on the active roster, in my opinion. So I think he makes the roster, no question in my mind. Tight ends. I think this is a lock for the first 3: Cole Kmet, Gerald Everett, Mercedes Lewis. And I think Brendan Bates has earned a job on the final 53. He's looked really good in the preseason. He's looked good at practice. He's a good blocker. He's been really good in the passing game. And I think he's a pretty good special teams player as well. So I have him also making the roster. And I think there will be more tight ends and linebackers playing teams this year than we're used to seeing because of the new kickoff rule. So I think Brendan Bates does make the roster. In my opinion, he's been the best of the tight ends outside of the main 3 of the guys that they brought in this year. I think he's been the best one thus far, and I think he's earned a final final 53 spot. And then
well, I would just real quick,
go ahead.
Tim. The one argument I would have to that is I think Brendan Bates is a practice squad guy, and I think if there is a tight end outside of those first three that makes the roster, it's probably Steven Carlson, because he is also impressed, and he's a guy that they've had for a while as well. And I think Bates is a guy you can stick on the practice squad, but that's just my opinion. We'll have to wait and see what they actually do, if they actually keep 4 tight ends on the roster.
My fear with Bates is I think if they do cut him, I'm not sure he makes the practice squad, because I think a team would like to have a guy who can, and somebody may snag him. So
I don't know about that, but
I don't know that for sure, but I think somebody could snag him. Carlson, we know what you're getting. But moving on, offensive line, like you talked about earlier, their locks were Braxton Jones, Tevin Jenkins, Ryan Bates, Coleman Shelton, Nate Davis, Darnell Wright, Karan Amagaji, and Matt Pryor. And I had Larry Borum on here. Now, this is where it's going to change for me. Obviously, the injury to last night to Larry Borum didn't look good. If I had to guess, he's going to go on injured reserve. So if he goes on injured reserve, they will need to replace him on the active roster. And I don't believe we're going to get it from the current offensive line room that we have in the practice squad. I believe it's going to be somebody from the outside that they sign for depth. I believe they'll sign somebody from someone else's cuts, and he will be on the 53. Who that is, I don't know. And then for the practice squad, they really like Bill Murray. I think he's going to still be around. Doug Kramer's been around for a few years. The surprise for some of you could be is Jatiri Carter. I think he's fallen out of favor with the Bears big time since last year. He hasn't looked that great thus far in the preseason and in camp. I think he's going to be on the practice squad. I don't think he's going to make the final 53. And they may not even sign him back to the practice squad, but I think they probably like to have him because of his experience. And then Theo Benedict, because they don't have a lot of tackle help. And that's also why I think they're going to sign somebody, because right now Matt Pryor can play tackle, but he's been filling in at guard. So, and right tackle, I'm not sure he can play left tackle right now, unless Karan Amagaji is fully healthy. They don't have anybody that can play left tackle right now outside of Braxton Jones if he gets injured. So I think they're probably going to bring somebody in who can play left tackle.
I was just going to say, I wouldn't be surprised to see them bring in another tackle off at the cut day. But I think there's a good outside shot that Bill Murray makes the roster too. But I agree with your practice squad guys. I think Carter's on the practice squad, so is Kramer. But the one thing I would say about Kramer is if there is an injury if that injury to Bates is lingering and he ends up going on IR, I think Kramer's on the active roster, because you only have one center.
I agree. Or they sign somebody there as well. But I think it's more likely that he would get promoted to the active roster too. But moving on, let's go to the defense. Okay, defensive line locks to me: Montez Sweat, Austin Booker, DeMarcus Walker, Jervon Dexter, Zach Pickens, Andrew Billings. And I have Daniel Hardy making the roster. I think he has definitely done enough to make the active roster. No doubt in my mind that he should make it. He has been very impressive. And obviously this is going to change a little bit now because of the addition of Darrell Taylor. So now who that affects, I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and speculate. I haven't actually had the time to go through all this again and see who I think isn't going to make it. Probably, I don't know. I don't know where he's going to take over. Daniel Hardy may not make the roster now, but in my opinion, he should and will make the roster, even with the addition of Taylor. I don't know who's going to get cut or who else would get cut to fill in that spot, but somebody will. And then today, Khalid Kareem got cut, but I think he's going back to the practice squad again. Jacob Martin has played pretty well as well. I think he's going to the practice squad, and I think Dominique Robinson, if as long as he comes back, it will be on the practice squad. But they may just cut him in general. He worked hard in the offseason, but he just doesn't do enough for me or for the Bears. I think he's probably going to make the practice squad. I think they'll probably bring him back for that, but I think he's just it's not in for him.
I just want to say something real quick. Cliff made a comment earlier that signing Taylor might not be good for Hardy. And there's one thing I would say to this. I think there's a good possibility that Hardy could make the roster. And I think I think that last defensive line spot's going to come down to Hardy or Dominique Robinson. And the reason I say that is because Hardy has obviously been the more impressive player throughout camp and throughout the preseason, the way he's played, his motor and all those things. But Robinson is a big dude. He's 6'5", 270 plus pounds. They need a guy who can set the edge in the run game, and I'm not sure Hardy's big enough to do that, especially considering the fact they just brought in a pass rusher, a guy who's better in that facet of the game. So I think it's going to come down to Hardy or Robinson, and I would not be surprised either way to see who makes the 53, but the other guy, in my opinion, would be on the practice squad in that scenario.
And I don't disagree with that either. They made that known last year when they picked up Khalid Kareem off the practice squad of Indianapolis, or excuse me, after Indianapolis cut him, they picked him up and they let Terrell Lewis go because they valued Kareem's run stopping ability better than Terrell Lewis's pass rushing ability. So it could be that way, and you could be right. But moving on really quickly, let's go on to I believe I have linebackers next. Yes, linebackers, locks. These are locks to me, Jeff. I think all these guys make it. Tremaine Edmonds, TJ Edwards, Jack Sanborn, Noah Sewell, Amin Agbangbamiga, and Micah Baskerville. And I have Sewell, Agbangbamiga, and Baskerville all making the roster because of their ability to play teams. Those guys are all good special teams players. Noah Sewell's actually a really good linebacker too. He'd probably be a starter elsewhere, as would Jack Sanborn. Well, he is the starting Sam, but he would probably be a starting Mike or Will elsewhere, probably a Mike. But all of these guys, or those final three guys, all play teams well. They're all, and I think they all play well. If there was an injury to any of those starting linebackers, any of those guys could fill in. Baskerville's been a really good piece the last couple years. Agbangbamiga, I've said it 3 times now. Hopefully I'm saying it right. He's been really good this preseason. I think all of those guys are going to make the roster. And again, like I said, they play teams well. So
see, this is where I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. I think we're only going to see 5 linebackers make the roster. I do agree with you on Agbangbamiga and Baskerville, because Baskerville's had an excellent preseason. He's been doing this for 2 years now where he's looked really good. And I think he's deserved a shot at making the team. He's done enough to where that's the kind of guy who, if he gets cut, I could see getting picked up by someone else. And I don't think you want to lose him. He's got good ball skills. He's a good tackler. He's a good special teamer too. So I think this is the kind of guy you want on your team. Sewell has not been impressive to me. And I know he's a 5th round pick and you don't want to just give up on him, but I think that's the kind of guy that you can cut and end up with on your practice squad. So I think he's the odd man out here. And he's been hurt. So that's another thing too, is he hasn't shown anything for anyone to be like, oh, well, because you got to remember all these other teams are going through the same thing. They've all got casualties they've got to cut too. And they got to figure out if, other teams are going to want to pick up their guys or not. So, I don't think Sewell's the kind of guy who's just going to get picked up right away by somebody else. I think he could end up on the practice squad. But I do think your other 5 guys you have on there with Edmonds, Edwards, Sanborn, Agbangbamiga, and Baskerville all make the team.
Well, and Sewell could be the guy that gets cut to bring Darrell Taylor in. So that's a possibility. So like I said, I haven't had time to go through my whole list and see, who's going to be out now to take that spot. So, and that very well could be the guy. So, but again, thought process also goes in this, that he was a 5th round pick. He's only had 1 season. They probably want to see what else he has. But again, this is a very deep team, especially at that position. So quickly moving on here. I believe I have corners next. This is honestly the best room in the entire team is the corners. You got Jalen Johnson, Tyreek Stevenson, Kyler Gordon, Terrell Smith, Jalen Jones, Josh Blackwell, all are locks. Greg Stroman, I think, is there as well because he looks really good as well. He's been a journeyman guy, but he's been here for 2 years and he's looked really good this preseason. He looked good last year. I think he makes the roster. He's also really good on special teams. And I think Reddy Stewart earned himself a place on the practice squad. If somebody doesn't sign him, I think there's a good chance that if he does get cut, he's getting signed elsewhere because he's been really good. And he's got a lot of good instincts to play corner in this league. And he very well could get signed. Jeff, I don't know if there's anything you want on this, but I can move on if not.
Just real quick, I want to say that typically teams only keep 6 and maybe 5 or maybe 6 corners, and I think it's usually 6. But I do think there's a good shot that the Bears are going to keep 7. They've got an awfully deep corner group. The one thing that I'm going to be interested to see is whether it's Stroman or Stewart, because Stewart has played really well, and he's the kind of guy that would worry me a little bit if you cut him, if somebody else is going to go and pick him up or not, because he showed a lot, especially with his ball skills. Stroman's the guy that they've had on the practice squad, on and off the practice squad for the last couple years now. So it wouldn't surprise me to see them stick him back on the practice squad again, and just, roll with Stewart on their 53 just to protect him from somebody else going after him. I'm going to be interested to see what happens with that. But the other 6, I think, are all locks. And that's going to be one I'm going to be paying close attention to, is between Stroman and Stewart, who makes the team.
And it could very well be that way. It could very well be that Brady Stewart makes it and Greg Stroman ends up on the practice squad. But moving on to safety, this one is pretty obvious to me. Byard, Brisker, Owens, and Hicks, I think, all make the roster. I don't think you can roll with just 3 safeties. Jonathan Owens, if Byard or Brisker gets hurt, Jonathan Owens can't play both positions. And I know they like Elijah Hicks. He's been around since Pole's first draft. They like him. He's a really good special teams player as well. I think that's pretty well set in those 4 positions. And I think Quindell Johnson makes the practice squad. Anything you have on this, Jeff?
No, I think I think the first 4 you're 100% right about. I don't know about Johnson, whether he's on the practice squad or not, but it wouldn't surprise me. But I think
they need they'll need a safety somewhere in there. So moving on to special teams, this is obvious. Cairo Santos, Torrey Taylor, Patrick Scales. That is the Tim Willis 53-man roster. Like I said, obviously some changes to that. There's going to be 1 or 2 changes to include Darrell Taylor in there. And then, like I said, I changed my mind on Kari Blasingame and Travis Homer. I think Homer is getting cut and Blasingame is going to make the team.
One thing real quick, before there is one question that's in the chat that I want to get to, but one thing I want to say about the specialists real quick before I get to that. Pat Scales has been hurt, guys. So that's one thing we should keep an eye on. They do have the other long snapper that's been on the roster, and I cannot for the life of me remember the guy's name now. But if for whatever reason Pat Scales is still hurt come week 1, which I'm not anticipating that to be the case, but we may see a different long snapper on the roster at first, and you might even see 2 on the roster to accommodate Scales until he's healthy. I don't know if they're going to put him on IR. So that's another thing I'm going to pay attention to. And yes, CLH, you just brought that up as well. Scales is hurt, so that's why I wanted to say that. But good thought there. There was one start question, but it was also from CLH. He wants to know real quick before we get out of here. Do you think we spend all this time game planning, because there's like 2 plus weeks before our game here, before we play the Titans? Do we spend all this days, or do we wait a week before we play them so it feels the same all season? I think both. CLH, I think they're really gonna ramp up like once they get like a week until the game, with the rest of the team really going through practice and really starting to game plan for the Titans. But I think that the coaches especially have had the Titans in the back of their mind for quite some time now, and how they're going to prepare for them and what they're going to do to win this football game, how they're going to get their team ready for week 1. So I think it's a little bit of both. I think they're going to really game plan hard for them like they typically would in a season the week before the game. But I think in the back of their minds, they've been trying to prepare for this for a while now, especially now. They're really going to kind of work on it now, in my opinion, as well. So that's a great question. I do think that there's a little bit of both there. But yeah, they've got it in the back of their mind for sure.
I think they're going to treat it like they've treated their bye weeks in the past, where that first week they'll go through and they'll look at future games, do a little bit of film study and game planning there based on what they're going to do in the future games. And then the next week they'll really hammer down and focus in on the game that week. So that's what I think they'll probably do. I think they'll probably treat it like a bye week. Eberflus tends to like to do that to give themselves a little bit of an advantage in their future weeks. So that's the way I view it. I think that's probably what they're going to end up doing. But
yeah, Aldo makes a good point here. He thinks most of next week is installing and hardening the players in practice, and the following week is getting into their regular routine. I do think they're going to have a tough next week of practice. I think they're going to be grinding hard to get ready for week 1. And then I agree, they're going to use the next week to get into that regular routine of game planning. And Damon Dice says the roster looks deep. And we talked about that early in the show. They really do. They look very deep. And some of these cuts are going to be tough ones. And I'm going to be interested to see who gets cut, who comes back to the practice squad, and what guys other teams end up signing off after they've been waived by the Bears. So we had a great show today, guys. There's a lot of stuff that I wanted to get to that I didn't necessarily get a chance to. We should have some time to do that next week, because Hard Knocks isn't over yet. There's a couple more episodes, but I do want to get into some more of that next week. But we had a great conversation today, going over the 53-man roster and some of the stuff that we expect to see from the team. Once again, before we get out of here, just a quick reminder, guys, to please like the video. Please subscribe to the channel at Barroom Network here on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts from, whether it be Spotify or Apple or wherever. We ask that you please give us all a follow on Twitter. You can find Aldo, our executive producer, and the man at Barroom Network. You can find me at _Jeff Willis, and you can find Tim at Tim Willis 24. Again, these are all on Twitter or X, however you want to call it nowadays. We all provide great content, especially Aldo, who's always popping out good videos for YouTube and good posts on X as well. So again, guys, please like that video. Please subscribe. Please give us a follow. And until next week, we'll see you guys. And we hope you have a good rest of your week and bear down.
Da Bears.
The Willis Twin Towers podcast is a Barroom Network production. Jeff and Tim Willis are the co-hosts and co-producers. Aldo Gandia is executive producer. Music is licensed from Pond 5. Any copyrighted material used was done under the Fair Use Doctrine for commentary, criticism, and informative purposes. All of our programming is available in audio-only format by subscribing to the Barroom Network wherever you download podcasts. Videos are archived on YouTube.